When you take away the YouTube snobbery, here's a build that beats the PS5 Pro for less than the cost and then actually gives some pretty reasonable advice. However, there was one issue here. As mentioned in this comment, apples and oranges, PS5 Pro has a 2TB SSD. This is all in response to my recent build video taking on the challenge from a viewer of can you build a PS5 Pro killer for $699, which wasn't really possible when they first launched if you're buying all new parts, but with the help of AMD's 9060 XT 16GB, that is actually now somewhat doable. Although in that video, I said that this was not actually a great build to make. And I instead recommended a, honestly, just more expensive list. But what if we did want to take on roughly this price point, but let go of exactly matching the PS5 Pro? In other words, what if I just set a more general $700 to $800 price point and said, what is a bang for the buck build you could do there, even if I would personally recommend going up to about $1,000 to get onto a more modern CPU platform? Anyway, this is the build list we made in that video where we were specifically targeting the PS5 Pro. But there's some things about this build that I don't like if I'm just targeting a budget gaming PC rather than specifically targeting a PS5 Pro. I mean, there's a lot I didn't like about this. I want to be clear. If you didn't watch that video and you're looking at this list and you're like, oh my God, he recommended this. No, I didn't recommend this. I was very clear that while we could get into $700, and by the way, it's a couple of days since I filmed that video, so prices have fluctuated a bit. It was right at about $700 at the time. This was just, I was showing the cuts you had to make to match the PS5 Pro specs. But there's some things about the PS5 Pro that aren't really the best choice if you're making a budget build, like a fast 2TB SSD. You could cut the capacity a bit, something like that, in order to make room for a better CPU. And what if we were just slightly more flexible on the budget, etc.? Because here we're on a terrible power supply, literally the cheapest case in existence as of the time of filming, a not great CPU, a not great motherboard, and only 16GB of RAM. This is awful. We could just make a tiny bit more room in the budget by cutting the SSD a little bit and then just freeing up the headroom on the budget by like $50. And we are going to come out with something much better than this, which I realize is probably something I should have done in this video when I was getting a bunch of comments similar to this one where they're like, kind of taking on a better build in that budget, which I think does make a lot of sense. But that just wasn't what I was trying to do with that video. But I think it would have made sense at the end of that video to say, here's something to build instead if you're in this price range and can't really go that much above this price range. So that's what we'll do in this video. In other words, what's a better budget build in the $700 to $800 range, even though you could take a look at my $1,000 build, which I actually just recommend if your budget could stretch that far. But anyway, so here's the thing. Like I said, while I love having a 2TB SSD, I don't think that that's the best place to be throwing $100 if I only have $800 or $700 to throw on the gaming PC. So let's start by cutting this, although honestly, most of these parts besides the GPU are going to get cuts. So let's go ahead and sort prices low to high on SSDs, but wait a second, let's filter for a couple of things. First of all, I do still want to have an M.2 NVMe drive. And another thing is, okay, I want to cut the capacity, but we still want room for a couple of games in an operating system, so let's get at least 500 gigabytes. Now, personally, I'd probably prefer a terabyte, and we might look at that later, kind of see what the prices would change. But for now, the idea is you can install some games and your operating system on 500 gigabytes, and then SSDs are so easy to add additional SSD capacity in the future that we could just do that in the future. Now, scrolling through these are certainly not all created equal. Glancing at them, I think the Team Group MP44L is going to be the fastest of the bunch. They're all very similarly priced. So I'm going to go ahead and throw this one in. I know it's faster than the MP33. And let's go ahead and add that to the build. So we freed up a bunch of budget. So now, other than the SSD, capacity, we are actually still matching a PS5 Pro performance-wise, but actually for a little bit less money, but we, like I said, have significantly less SSD capacity. But it would make sense to throw that additional money into the build at a better CPU. So if we stay on this cheapo motherboard, we could fit other AM4 CPUs. We could probably get into something like a Ryzen 5 5600, which is going to be noticeably faster than the 3600. Looks like I get one for $133 right now. The G version is actually slower for gaming. It just comes with integrated graphics, so don't grab that one instead. So yeah, we'll just go ahead and grab this one. There we go. So now we're actually back to roughly the same overall price, but now we actually have a faster CPU than what's in the PS5 Pro, and I think I would be much more comfortable on a Ryzen 5 5600 in modern games than I would be on the 3600. So I already like this a lot better. But now if we let go of the exactly $700 price point and free up some room to stay, let's stay under $800, but let's see what else could we improve in this build. So one thing I'd like to look at is with the motherboard, can we get in something that has built-in Wi-Fi and is like a B550 rather than an B520. So the B550 will have a little bit higher end feature set here. Let's sort prices low to high on what would be compatible. Looks like we do get a B550 with Wi-Fi for $100. It's gonna be a better motherboard. This one has a lot of 5-star reviews on PC Part Picker. That doesn't always mean everything. But hey, that's something. So I like this motherboard, certainly better than what we were starting out with. And again, we're only up to $742 now, and I like the build a lot better. Now, rather than throw money at a CPU cooler, there is one that comes in the box. It's not great, but it will get the job done. I'd rather throw the extra few dollars we might have in our budget at getting out of 16 gigabytes of system memory. So let's go back to 32 gigabytes of system memory, and on DDR4, you definitely want to be on 2x16 configuration. You want 2 sticks, so you're in dual channel configuration. Sort prices low to high. Looks like we can get, there's not a lot of speed increases really to be had for throwing more money at the problem, so we'll get the DDR4 3200 CL16 for $50. Okay, so again, we're still well under $800, and now our CPU platform's better. We have a more featured motherboard with built-in Wi-Fi, and we have 32 gigabytes of system memory. Again, the SSD here is very small in capacity, but it is still plenty quick, which is good. That'll just be something you'll have to upgrade in the future if you're finding that you want to have more games installed at once than fit on your drive. Again, the 9060 XT 16GB GPU is really very, very solid here. So the last things we could spend some more money on are the case and power supply. Now, case I'll come back to in a second. Power supply, I absolutely do not want this. Remember, we put this on the list because it was like one of the cheapest ones that had any sort of like above F tier, but we're talking like E tier. It's hard to tell exactly which Thermaltake this is. I'm using SPL's PSU tier list here, by the way. Where the Smart brand from Thermaltake, some of them are C or C plus tier, but this appears to be a white label between 430 and 700 watts, which is an F tier CPU. When I added it to the build, I initially thought it might be this one of these E or C tier models, which again, I'm actually not sure which one it is, but either way, let's just get it out of the build, okay? So we don't need an amazing power supply. I think it's good to have one, but let's just get something that isn't like potentially E or F tier. So if I sort prices low to high once again, a lot of these Apevia units are the cheaper ones on here. This EVGA is out of stock. That's only 400 watts and not one of the better EVGA ones. A lot of Apevias are F tier, but I think the Prestige line actually might be higher. I think it might be C tier. Let me go ahead and check that out. So I'm going to search for Apevia on our tier list here. And yeah, everything from Apevia is either F or E tier, except for the Prestige in the 600, 800, and 1000 watt lineup. So Apevia Prestige is at least C tier. This is something gonna be a little bit better than what we had. Still not amazing, but less likely to burn the place down, right? Anyway, so we're there. We're still under $800. Now, if you have a few more dollars in the budget, we could also look at the case situation. So again, this case was selected by sorting prices low to high and then clicking the lowest one. So what would I be looking for here? Well, okay, actually, let's look at a couple of other options. So if I had a few more dollars in my budget, cases like this Montech XR, something like that, is probably a lot nicer. Let's see, Fantex XT Pro. So these $60 to $70 cases certainly have something going for them other than what we had selected previously. I'm going to go ahead and throw this one in. Again, we could probably get something cheaper or whatever, but now we're at basically $800. So remember, you could keep a cheaper case if you wanted to. But a build like this is going to be significantly better than that initial, PS5 Pro list. So if you want to match a PS5 Pro for $700, including the 2TB SSD, you can roughly do it on PC now, but I don't think it's the optimal configuration. So I do think that this configuration we're going with here does have a much better gaming performance per dollar ratio, as well as just some nice to have features like the built-in Wi-Fi, 32 gigabytes of system memory, a nicer case, at least slightly better power supply, and like I said, some nice to have features here. Now, I will say that this isn't the only option we could go with, though. So another option is sometimes Intel's 12400, which came out around the same time as the Ryzen 5 5600, and is generally slightly faster. We're not talking a lot faster, but we're talking ever so slightly faster. I think if I go to like a Tech Power Up CPU review and scroll down to where we get to kind of that sort of tier, yeah, the 12400F is still ranked a little bit ahead of the Ryzen 5 5600X. So I think that could be another interesting potential option. So what if I go ahead and copy this build, and then we go ahead and switch it up for an Intel option, just to kind of throw that into the video in case somebody would prefer. So let's go ahead and edit this parts list once more and go with, okay, what if we switch the CPU and the motherboard out, and we instead check on the pricing of Intel's 12400Fs at this point? Yeah, so it actually does look like you can get a 12400F for less than the Ryzen 5 5600 right now. Now, depending on motherboard pricing, that could may or may not come out ahead or a wash, but I think it's worth looking into here. Sort motherboard pricing, low to high. Okay, there are certainly some options here around that same $100 mark. A lot of H610s. We do have a B660 here, but again, with the CPU costing less, it is still going to save money even if we go with the same price point on motherboard. Maybe we'll go ahead and sort out for having some Wi-Fi on the motherboard as well, since we're kind of going into the nicer to have. But if you don't need Wi-Fi on yours, you could probably get something a little bit better. Man, the Wi-Fi versions really don't seem to be that great of a deal, do they? And that would be back to an H610. What do we want to do, guys? Maybe we'll leave off the Wi-Fi requirement. And so again, like I said, some people need Wi-Fi in their setup to fit into their setup. Some do not. So we'll just kind of go with there. We do have a B760 here that fits with the DDR4. Let's go with that. Okay, so we have another option here, this one coming in a little bit less money and potentially a little bit faster on the CPU, but this time coming in with the without motherboard Wi-Fi. Now you can fit in like a Wi-Fi dongle or something like that to add in Wi-Fi for not too much money. And as I mentioned in the last video, I'm not throwing in the cost of the operating system because some people will already have a Windows license that can just transfer over. Other people are fine with buying those incredibly cheap gray market Windows licenses. Other people would use a free operating system like Linux, like SteamOS, Bazite, things like that are honestly pretty impressive these days. So anyway, there we go. That is a build for under $800. We had the AMD option that was a little bit more. Where was it? Here, yeah, like I said, a little bit more than $800. And that, I think, is better options. Now, I think the other thing that we could add in this video that people were asking for a little bit in the last one is, can we actually see the gaming potential here? Now, I will say that some people wanted me to buy all these parts and build them as part of the video, and I'm just gonna be 100% honest here. I don't have that kind of budget, guys. Also, by the time I ordered the parts, got them here, etc., things are going to be, prices will have changed, etc. But what I can do is throw together roughly this same performance level of parts. So in other words, I do have a Ryzen 5 5600 using the stock cooler on a B550, I think pretty sure it is, motherboard. Not this exact same one, with 32 gigabytes of DDR4 memory. I believe it is 3200 CL16. On actually a very similar SSD to this. It's not in the same case, but it's in a similar case. Probably has a better power supply, but it's not going to affect performance as long as things are working. I do have a 9060 XT 16 gigabyte. So how about I actually pop into that system now and get some gameplay footage for you guys testing out the performance of a roughly on par with this build, even if it's not exactly the same parts. So I threw together a very similar build using parts I actually had. This is a Ryzen 5 5600X CPU rather than 5600 non-X. That's just a minor clock speed difference, and I am using the stock cooler on it. For memory here, the speeds are, it's still 32 gigabytes, 2x16. This is DDR5 3600 CL18, but the faster speeds in the build, I listed the slower speeds, but faster latency means these actually come out with about the same first word latency. So that should be fine. And again, I had a different B550 with Wi-Fi that I could use for this build here, rather than the one listed, because again, prices change. I went with a different case as a Corsair 4000D Airflow with a couple of stock fans and nothing else added to it. And we can go ahead and slot in the Radeon RX 9060 XT. I have the Asus Prime model, which was a review sample, so I'll go ahead and slot that one in. And then we will test out the gaming performance. All right, so for gameplay testing, let's start out with my favorite game of 2025, which is Clair Obscur Expedition 33, loading up a save at the beginning of the game because I don't want to do any spoilers or anything. What am I supposed to do? I'm supposed to pick a flower. Okay, guys, I promise there is more to the game than picking flowers, so there is that. But anyway, we can go ahead and sprint along here and make sure we are maintaining over 60 FPS. Certainly looks like we, for the most part, are. Now, what settings am I at here? Now, we didn't really talk about whether you should be targeting 1080p or 1440p or whatever, because honestly, with the use of upscalers, the lines have kind of been blurred between your monitor resolution and your rendering resolution. But here I'm just looking at the high quick preset at 1080p, 100% rendering resolution using the inbuilt TSR. And it is looking like we're able to average right around 60 FPS here, it looks like, at these settings. So overall looking pretty good, but of course we could, one of the nice things, again, if we're comparing to the PS5 Pro kind of situation, is we do have options on graphic settings. For example, we could go down to medium settings, which still look honestly about the same as the high settings, stay at the native rendering resolution, and now we're getting higher frame rates than you can get on any console. They're, of course, limited to 60 FPS no matter what. Now, we could go ahead and try some other options as well. For example, what if you were targeting a 1440p display? So if I go ahead and jump over to a 1440p output, for now we'll be at the medium settings. We'll see how it goes. I'll go ahead and reset the frame rate counters. See, at a native 1440p, we're falling short of 60 FPS. This is perfectly playable, but we are kind of in the 50s. However, like I said, we're kind of at a point where native rendering resolution isn't exactly the design targets for a lot of games, like it or not. That's just kind of how things are. You know, that is the way it is. Looks like we're getting into a battle tutorial here. But while we do that, I could go ahead and look at, okay, so what if we didn't want to drop below 60 FPS during battle? So we can go ahead and change to, we could either stay on TSR or XESS. This game does not have FSR4 support, although our GPU does for games that do, and you could look at modding it in with Optiscaler. I've got videos on that. But we could go ahead and go with XESS at like a ultra quality plus rendering resolution. Let's see if that kind of holds us closer to that 60 FPS line. Okay, it's getting us some explanations of the battle system. Let's go ahead and attack. By the way, I do quite enjoy the battle system in this game. It starts out very simple like this, but it has real-time dodges and parries, which is kind of nice. So actually, I think it kind of combines the best of turn-based games with some of the best, honestly, of more action-focused games, where you can have really interesting builds and stat-based stuff, along with actually having, you know, your real-time feedback and everything like that. So anyway, the point is, looks like we are definitely easily staying over 60 FPS on a 4K output, not 4K, 1440p output here with these settings. Now, if we wanted to try to do something like, for example, a PS5 Pro does, we would probably stay around these medium settings, but go to more like a 50% internal rendering resolution. The PS5 Pro is probably using TSR, and again, we would be going to a 4K output. So I really know that in the PC space, you're unlikely to be pairing a build like this with a 4K monitor. But in case you were trying to do this as like a console replacement on your 4K TV or something like that, we could go ahead and try this out. So we could go down to 50% per axis resolution, which I think is what the game actually does on the PS5 Pro's performance mode when it's targeting 60 FPS. I think it's really at about a 1080p internal rendering resolution and at some reduced settings. So if we go ahead and do this, it does look like we are currently averaging, or looks like 65 FPS standing still. Let's see what happens when we actually do stuff. So it looks like we can dip a little bit underneath it, but not badly or anything. Hey, we won the combat. We're averaging around 60 FPS, and we continue. Okay, so we've established that this game can run well at 1080p, 1440p, and 4K, as long as you're choosing settings, you know, appropriate to the hardware on here. And again, a PS5 Pro-ish type experience. Neat. Let's go ahead and try out some other games, though. All right, let's switch over to Cyberpunk because I want to talk about something. Let's go to the Ultra preset, and we're going to be starting out at native 1080p resolution. We'll look at other stuff from here. But this is Ultra without ray tracing, and you can see that we're getting in the mid 70 or so FPS range, but you can see that the GPU is not always fully loaded. The GPU usage percentage sometimes down at about 85, 90% range, but sometimes it does get nearly fully loaded. Now, if you look at the CPU usage percentage, it's often up in the 80 or plus percent range, and the higher it goes, usually the lower the GPU usage goes. In other words, what we're seeing right now is where that Ryzen 5 5600 is potentially a bit of a limiting factor here. Not awfully so. And we're still reaching completely reasonable frame rates, and I'm currently in Dogtown, which is one of the more demanding, especially on the CPU areas. Not the most necessarily, like I know there's like a certain marketplace and get really CPU demanding in this game, but I just want to show that we can get a little bit heavy on the CPU in open world games with a lot of characters on it and things like that. But again, 1080p ultra settings and often well over 70 to 80 FPS. Which means, what if we went up to something like, 1440p resolution? Let's stick it, again, it says custom now because we turned off upscaling, but these are otherwise ultra presets, but without ray tracing. And let's go ahead and see what we're doing here. So it's actually looking like, again, even in the Dogtown area, we are at right around 60 FPS at 1440p ultra settings in Cyberpunk. So pretty good. Notice now the CPU usage is a lot lower because the GPU is becoming more of the limitation. We're at like 99% utilization on the GPU, meaning that we're now seeing GPU limited performance down at 1080p resolution when the frame rates were higher. we were getting more into CPU limits. Now, some people misunderstand and think that CPU is more important at lower resolutions, and that's not actually the case. What it is CPU is more important at higher frame rates. You're more likely to hit your CPU limits. So for example, if I stay at a 1440p output, but we started to use upscaling, like let's go with, the quality level upscaling, let's start with that, with FSR, you'll now see that I think we're going to end up in a more similar to the situation we were seeing at 1080p. Well, looks like we're still, controller disconnected, okay. I was using controller when I was playing Expedition 33, but now I am not. All right, so it's looking like now we're seeing the GPU utilization sometimes dip into the 80-something% range, and you can start to see that little bit more of that issue take place. So again, it all kind of depends on the graphic settings you're on, etc. Unfortunately, another game that doesn't have FSR 4 support, although Optiscaler does work really well here if you want to mod it in. A little beyond the scope of this video, but I do have an Optiscaler related video. What if we even tried to get some ray tracing going on this? So what if we went with RT Ultra, but we allowed it to use some upscaling here? Maybe let's go to balance mode upscaling. Not quite sure how this will go, but I am kind of interested. Ray tracing has an effect on both the CPU and GPU here. And you know what? It's not 60 FPS, but considering we're on RT Ultra, although with a good amount of upscaling, or around 50-ish FPS. Due to FSR 3 here, I probably wouldn't use these, but maybe with Optiscaler on FSR 4. But the point is, you're capable of some pretty heavy-duty settings, but I do think that sticking to just the normal Ultra is probably the best optimized choice for performance here. And I'm actually curious if we went to a 4K output, but maybe drop back down to, let's just go with the high preset. But 4K. We'll start out with native and then upscale as needed to get this working. I'm actually curious how this will go. Okay, so 4K is demanding here. We are at like 35-ish FPS, but again, we could use some amount of upscaling here. Let's go with FSR quality. Let's start with that and kind of see where that gets us. So FSR quality, we're already pretty dang close to a 60 FPS output now. And FSR with a 4K output quality mode can look pretty dang reasonable. Again, so you're absolutely capable of 1080p, 1440p, and even 4K with appropriate settings choices on this in Cyberpunk, and potentially even some ray tracing, although it's certainly not a ray tracing powerhouse. Let's try out a couple other games before we're done. All right, let's try out a ray tracing mandatory game like Doom the Dark Ages, see how we do. I'm gonna start out at 1080p resolution, native resolution, TAA, Ultra Nightmare settings. I'm not kicking on the path tracing mode, but we are gonna go ahead and try out the otherwise maxed out settings in the game, hit the frame rate averages, and get out into one of the larger combat sections in the game, and kind of see how we do. So it looks like we could be dipping into the upper 50s at times, but otherwise things are looking pretty good here. Yeah, dipping into the 50s at times, so not completely maxed out at a 60 FPS lock, but certainly averaging, it looks like 59 FPS so far in this combat. I'm not really paying too much attention to the combat, perhaps I should. But there we go. Yeah, so it looks like we can average around 60 FPS at 1080p maximum resolution. Now, if this is the kind of game where you're looking for more of a frame rate thing rather than a graphics thing, if we switch down to the medium settings, there's honestly not a huge visual downgrade. And it is looking like overall performance is going to be noticeably higher, not crazy high. Let's see how it goes as we get into more of this actual combat. I should probably try to parry the green things, but whatever. And yeah, it looks like now the averages are sticking a little more solidly above the 60 FPS line with the occasional dip. Again, most of the game runs better than this section. This is definitely one of the heavier sections in the game, bigger sight lines and all that going around. So there is that. What if we wanted to go ahead and switch to 1440p resolution? Let's go 1440p. And you know what? Let's try this. Let's go dynamic resolution scaling with a 60 FPS target and just kind of see how that does, trying to hold to that 60 FPS line. So this is just allowing the game to go below 100% resolution if needed. In other words, this is more like how a console would generally be running it. So you'll notice that hopefully hopefully we'll see how it goes. The frame rate will stay probably around 60, and what's going to vary is the resolution. Are things looking, blurrier? But it is looking like we're able to just ask it for 60 FPS and get 60 FPS and just not really worry about it. It just stays around 60 FPS. So there's that. I can see a little bit of blurring going on here, so it's certainly not a absolute native rendering resolution, but during the combat, you're generally mostly thinking about the combat and all of that. Can I ask it for 4K 60 and just let it dynamic scale it? Let's find out. So 4K output and just asking it to try to resolution scale as needed to hit 60 FPS. I'm not sure what the lower bound is on their resolution scaling target. I'm curious if we're going to be able to get here. It's looking like it's bottoming out and not quite holding to 60. We're at 50-ish right now, and we're not into the combat yet. So it is looking like it might struggle to actually hit the full... yeah, it looks like we're going to be down into the 40s. So this is certainly a game where if you're trying to actually output 4K, even with internal scaling, it's going to be a bit rough. We could go down to the low settings rather than the medium settings and see if that's able to get us the rest of the way there. Let's go ahead and find out. Okay, it's looking like it's at least more like in the 50s more often than not. Certainly feels a little less heavy on my mouse, I'll tell you that. But yeah, this looks to be one where getting an absolute 60 FPS lock is going to be maybe not super easy to achieve, but that's at a 4K output again, which is probably not what most people are targeting on this system. But hey, we have gone ahead and tested out a bunch of stuff. If you're just playing esports games, they're going to be running a lot faster than me trying out these big AAA games, even ray tracing required games and all of that. So overall, it looks like you're getting a lot of performance out of this system for around that $800 price point. Kind of interesting. My overall thoughts, though, are just the, again, if you can go up to the $1,000 price range, you can get a much more modern CPU platform, which will pay off both now, because we saw in games like Cyberpunk with a lot of people on screen, or in certain multiplayer games if you got a lot of people in the same area. Having the more modern CPU platform with my $1,000 build I've done in a recent video, I think would pay off. But if you've got about $800 to spend, this certainly has a lot of gaming performance there. Now, one question mark you may have is the, can I hear that stock CPU cooler? And the answer is not really while I'm gaming, but if I listen for it, yeah, there's definitely a little bit of fan noise going on there. It's not dead silent. So, you can always throw on a $30 CPU cooler in the future if you want to keep things a little bit quieter and more stable and all of that. But anyway, like I said, this does seem to certainly get the job done, even in the latest big AAA games and demanding stuff and ray tracing required and all of that. At 1080p, 1440p, and even if you wanted to hook it up to like your 4K TV in the living room, we are not completely out of place or anything like that. So. Anyway, like I said, there is some diminishing returns on this motherboard platform compared to if you can spend a bit more, but if you can't, we're still getting an awful lot of performance out of this thing. I hope all of you have an excellent day and enjoyed the video.